So hello everyone and welcome to this session of Shergroup on the sofa. I hope wherever you are in the world today, you're in a good place. Now I'm really pleased today to have my guest on the show, which is Stephen Cowan, somebody that I have known in my network for a long time. He can tell you how long if he wants to. But before we get into the interview, I just wanted to give a shout out to our #1 fan, Ross Saunders. So, hey, Ross, how are you today? And I think Stephen wants to say hello to you as well.
Hi, Ross. Stephen here. Hope you enjoyed the show.
He always does. He listens for it on Facebook. So you'll be a star today in his book for sure. All right. So, okay. I want to talk to you as a Scottish solicitor today, somebody that I really admire, and I have watched with interest your own involvement in Scottish debt recovery. You have done so much to put Scotland on the map with its own jurisdiction, its own laws, and its own development of the law in this area, which, as we both know, is hugely important. And as I keep telling you, I could play for Scotland. You laugh at me, but I am the English daughter of a proud Glaswegian. And of course, you are a proud Glaswegian. So we've always had that affinity, haven't we, about Scotland and you know, how special it is. And I don't want to see it as a foreign jurisdiction, but you might make me. I think that's where I'm at.
Yeah, it's interesting how few people understand why, in fact, there is a separate Scottish legal system. I think in all of the, and I'm not going to go through it just now, except to say that Scotland was an entirely separate country until 1707. But I think in all the lectures that I've ever done, I always ask the question, only one person has ever answered correctly. But separate we are.
Yeah, you are. And proud to be so. It's all part of the heritage. But you personally have done so much to share that with us English south of the border and in other parts of the world. So I'm delighted to hear.
Thank you.
So what did you first do in the law? What was your first sort of role?
Well, I'm just trying to remember when I graduated. So actually, I graduated in 1976 from Strathclyde University. I did my was called an apprenticeship then in a firm called Levy and McRae, which is still an excellent firm. Eventually, I went to Yuill and Kyle solicitors, and really what I did in Yuill and Kyle was a mixed bag. Essentially, Yuill and Kyle is what you would call general private client practice. That's really what it was, buying and selling houses. But the partner there, the younger partner, Morton Milholm, really bolted on a commercial department. So I did a lot of commercial conveyancing, commercial leasing, commercial borrowing. I did a lot of liquor licensing, because we dealt with a lot of businesses in the license trade, and the extent to which I had any advocacy skills, I honed them in particularly the Glasgow Licensing Board, which was a lot more difficult to appear before the Glasgow Licensing Board could be quite traumatic. It'd be a lot more difficult than appearing in the Sheriff Court, because sheriffs, who were the judges in the Sheriff Court, tended to be very courteous and would warn you if there's any problem, whereas the Glasgow Licensing Board, there was 13 of the councillors there, and they could fire any sort of question at you. So to an extent, I did learn advocacy skills doing my liquor licensing.
Yes,
that's broadly what I did.
You.
Sorry?
I didn't know that about you, about the liquor licensing.
Yeah.
So that reminded me, I mean, you had a mentor in, I've forgotten his name. What was the name?
Former partner.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Morton, who
Morton,
sadly
yes.
died a few years ago.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
could I describe him as a mentor? I mean, I was enormously fond of him, and we had an extremely happy partnership. He wasn't an innovator though, but I wouldn't honestly. I mean, I wouldn't really regard him as being a mentor. I'm not. Sorry about this.
That's okay.
My apologies. Just have to take that out. It's both working in the same room together.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, he was great to work with, and we had a good business structure. But Yuill and Kyle as a firm really was not something that was ever going to set the heather on fire. That really was the truth of it. It's a good Scottish expression there.
Yes, that is a good Scottish expression. But like me, you came into an old established law firm. I can remember coming to your offices in Glasgow, and they were so similar to the offices that we originally had in London. Same old desks, books, you know, just the
It does
way.
help you.
Yeah, it was amazing. But very lots of synergy there between both of us in terms of what we tried to do with our firms and did achieve with our firms actually. So Yuill and Kyle, I mean, that was the brand how I met you. And I remember you coming down to, I don't know, it was some ICM, Chartered Institute of Credit Management now, but ICM as it was when we first met. And I remember you had little bottles of whiskey and you were like, you know, you were talking to people and getting them to think about Scotland with a slug of alcohol, which I thought was very cool. And you were doing a lot of traveling, talking and, you know, to talk to people about Scotland and getting them to, you know, transfer judgments to Scotland and do debt recovery in Scotland. I mean, how did you build up from, you know, that very traditional kind of law firm, old-fashioned law firm into, you know, the entity that you built in Yuill and Kyle? How did you do that?
I actually think it's quite an interesting story, but very few people are actually interested in listening to it.
I am.
Well, you know what they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and desperation is the mother of necessity. We had a system in Scotland that when you carried out a conveyancing transaction, the fee that you charged was regulated by the Law Society of Scotland. And it was meant to be a fair system, fair to everybody. However, the Director General of Fair Trading, that office no longer exists, said that this was an unfair practice and a restrictive practice. And he said that it was going to have to stop. The president of the Law Society of Scotland sent an email to every Scottish solicitor saying, we've done our best to fight this, but we're not going to win this argument. And he said that he's got two concessions. The monopoly on scale fees was going to disappear. And secondly, as the second concession was, we would be able to advertise. One thing that Morton did have the foresight to do was to say to, or ask myself and my other partner at that time, George Ross, what he thought the future of Yuill and Kyle would be in this eventuality. And the upshot was that we knew we were not going to survive. Morton basically said, this is a very long story, but I'll cut it short. Or he tasked me to try to find something else to do in law. And I came back with the idea of doing debt collecting and to market it.
Yeah.
At the time that I had met you, we must have been some way down the road.
Yeah. You looked pretty established, I have to say.
Well, we had still a long way to go. I will be very happy to talk about, you know, how we started marketing and what we did. I don't know if you want me to speak about that now, but eventually what happened was that once we built the business up, in tandem or parallel with that, we had to get an IT system in, which was far easier said than done because they didn't exist in Scotland.
No.
And we did this with great difficulty. We made some terrible mistakes, and they were very, very costly because people basically promised the earth. And I didn't have any way to assess whether what they were saying was right or wrong. But we did get there eventually. So we morphed from this general commercial practice to doing debt collecting, which gradually outgrew the general legal practice, which eventually we got rid of, or we sold many years ago, about 30 years ago. It wasn't really worth anything, to be honest. And we purely focused on debt collecting. And we grew to be one of the largest legal suppliers of debt recovery in Scotland. We're not the only one, but we started with no clients, and now we've got a considerable number of clients.
And of course, over the years, you and I have had, you know, many lovely lunches where you've been kind enough. I think you're the only person that's invited me to lunch multiple times. And we've had lots of nice lunches where we've sat and chewed the cud about, you know, how we were going to do this, that, and the other. And I have to say that you have been tenacious with your business in terms of fighting for it. I mean, you know, the way that you handled IT, you know, and put that system in, the way that you handled marketing, you've always been a step ahead. I mean, many lawyers now, it doesn't matter where they are in the world, they're all having to market their practices. They're all learning that, you know, nobody just will, the referral system of getting business is not going to work for lawyers like it did 40 years ago, 30 years ago. And you've always been a step ahead. I mean, I remember coming to your office and you had books on marketing on the desk, you know. I thought that was so cool that a lawyer should be even looking at that. So you were definitely an inspiration to me. I just wanted to keep up with you.
I was lucky. So I'll tell you, I mean, now that it's all, you know, the age I am, I'll tell you, you know, the influences in my career. I mean, Morton was an influence, but there were two other individuals that have significant influence, and one was Thomas Higgins, who unfortunately I haven't spoken to for many years. But Tom Higgins really was the solicitor that pioneered volume legal debt recovery.
Yeah, we take.
And he was unbelievably helpful to me. I went down to his office in Wallasey many, many times. He was unbelievably generous in what he did. He showed me precisely how he operated. Some of the systems and procedures that we have in place are still adopted from what Thomas Higgins did. It was Tom that explained the importance of marketing to me. And he actually bought me my first marketing book. And I remember him saying to me, if you keep thinking like a lawyer, he said, you'll never succeed in this. You must forget you're a lawyer. And we would sit down sometimes for maybe an hour and a half talking about marketing. And I remember he would say, you know, you're thinking like a lawyer again, you must stop this. So he basically gave me the idea of marketing, the concept of marketing. And the next thing to do was to try to execute that plan. And to do that, what we did was we did some space advertising and some sales letters, because Tom did direct mail-to-mail marketing, and we built up a lot of business that way. You never do that today because it's too expensive. But drafting a sales letter is actually a very skilled and difficult feature to accomplish. And that's where all the books and the tapes that you saw and CDs came from. So I said there was two big influences. The second big influence, I didn't spend as much time with Derek, but was Derek Webster. Now, Derek Webster actually was a client of Morton's in Yuill and Kyle. And he was a sub-editor when he met Morton of the Daily Record. And he became editor of the Daily Record and ultimately managing director of the Daily Record. So he was the head of that organization.
Yeah.
And the Daily Record was the most profitable newspaper in the Mirror Group. I can't go into a great deal of detail because even though Derek died many years ago,
yeah,
his ultimate, well, not say ultimate boss, but the chairman of the Mirror Group was Robert Maxwell.
Yes.
And he got into a situation with Robert Maxwell of possible dispute, and Morton successfully steered him through that. I met Derek on a number of occasions. I actually bought a parcel of land for him, and he built a house on it, and he took a shine to me.
Yeah.
And he asked me what I was doing. He took me out for lunch, and I explained to him what I was doing, writing these sales letters. And he said to me, and the adverts, he said, send me your advert, send me your mail shot, and I'll be happy to look at it, and we can have a meeting.
Okay.
And I have heard of this before. I didn't know it was apocryphal or not, that an editor with a red pen, and he sent the advert back and the mail shot back, arranged a meeting, and he said to me, you will never be able to afford the type of advertising that you want to do, so you're going to have to do it yourself. But I've never seen a red pen through everything that I'd written. There was not a line. And he basically put in his wording, and he explained to me why he did that and what it would be. He took me out to lunch. He was very, very helpful. I'm not saying he did this on multiple occasions.
Yeah. But
bearing in mind that I'd already, by this time, read a good number of marketing books, I did have an understanding what he would say, and he was quite right.
Yeah.
So these, at that stage, were the primary influences in my career.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I hadn't heard that story about Derek before, but I had heard about Tom, and like you, I remember receiving one. I actually asked for one of his brochures pretty early on when I started developing my firm in the mid sort of 90s. And I can remember my partners being aghast that somebody had put a very flashy brochure together with all the female senior execs all looking like they just stepped off Dynasty. And it was all very glamorous. And he was sending it out, and he was, doing a letter before action for £1. That was his big thing. So I think that you've got to spend time with him. So we salute you, Tom Higgins, because you've had an influence on both of us. And wherever you are in the world, we wish you and your team and your family well. Okay, so yeah, I mean, advertising and getting the importance of the Yuill and Kyle brand together, again, was a huge part of your career. Although I always think with you that although this was a very important part of the career, you simultaneously managed to keep your legal brain in gear as well, which I always thought was tremendous. So, because I think some people think that advertising is lightweight and law is heavy, and you can't necessarily do the two, but you always manage that.
Well, the importance of the brand was very important to me. I wanted to promote Yuill and Kyle. I'm sure I mentioned this to you before, but one of the, I wouldn't say it was an influence, but when I was going through the concept or the understanding of the importance of advertising, just by chance, there was a panorama program in the BBC, and the program was purely about Coca-Cola. It wasn't an investigative piece of journalism, you know, saying how if Coca-Cola was nasty or anything, but the interviewer interviewed the global brand director of Coca-Cola. And I remember the question was approximately that you spend in advertising more globally than a small African, the gross domestic product of a small African state.
Yeah.
How can you justify that?
Yeah.
And I remember his answer. His answer was, you could be in a country and there could be a cholera epidemic and there could be signs up everywhere saying, do not drink the water. Drinking the water can be fatal. He said, but you wouldn't hesitate to open a can of Coca-Cola. And he was right. He was right. And that was and he said, that's the importance of the brand. So I wanted to, obviously we're not Coca-Cola, but I wanted the brand to be important. I didn't necessarily want Stephen Cowan to be the brand. I wanted Yuill and Kyle to be the brand. But at the same time, I had to be credible. So to do that, I had to gain knowledge in an area of law which I didn't know a huge amount about. And actually, in those days, the law surrounding debt recovery, apart from, I mean, it's a branch of civil litigation, so there's a lot of law involved in that. There's a lot of law involved in bankruptcy and liquidation. But the actual core subjects of judgment enforcement, it wasn't particularly topical then, but it is now. I mean, that's particularly since the Scottish Parliament got its powers in 1999. It's been very dynamic. So I, to an extent, capitalised on that and wanted to project myself as someone that knew a reasonable amount about the subject and how debt recovery essentially could improve cash flow.
Yeah, and you've achieved that across the United Kingdom. You know, and really.
Well, you taught me as well. Can I say that you also taught me, Claire?
Really? Really?
No, well, you did, and I do remember, and I've said this to you before. I remember listening to you speak, and you were talking about that what you do was to convert a judgment into cash. And I remember I felt so uncomfortable about that, and I don't know why. I thought it was infra dig, but it was. I mean, I use that myself now, and I do attribute it to you. But that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I know. When I, you know, when our paths are very similar in many respects, I always think, and I know that, like you know, I got into the advertising and marketing side, and I remember an old undersheriff saying to me, you know, we're not selling washing powder here. And I thought, yeah, you're not selling washing powder because you're not selling enough washing powder. That's why sheriffs are going, you know, into oblivion. And we need to make enforcement for the masses. And I think you've definitely achieved that through what you've done in Yuill and Kyle. And I hope that Shergroup has done a little bit of that in the rest of England and Wales. It is, you know, it's not for the elite people, particularly now with online court procedures and people being able to issue proceedings themselves. They need access to justice when it comes to enforcement of a judgment, as we both know. So I won't get on the soapbox about that because you'll laugh at me. Because you do laugh at me when I get all antsy about why we have to have sheriffs and high court enforcement officers. So I won't do that to you today. But we've had some good debates over the years, haven't we, about, you know, what's happening in the law and policy. And, you know, honestly, some of you officials out there, you might be listening to this on my channel, you could have had us two as experts and we could have told you how the world was going to turn out and how you could have made some of the policy decisions that you've made a lot simpler for yourselves just by listening to experts in the field rather than trying to be experts yourselves. But there we are. What would we know? So as part of your credibility stack, you wrote a book. I think it was the first one ever on Scottish debt recovery. Is that right?
Probably not, to be honest.
I bet it was. You're just being modest. It was.
No, there was Wilson on Debt, for example, which hasn't been rewritten. But
Okay.
as a practical legal guide for Scottish solicitors, it may have been one of the first.
Absolutely. So did you have a fun time writing that?
No. Or
I knew you were going to say that.
it was a real challenge. I learned a great deal, and I thought doing the second edition would be a lot easier than the first, but actually it was more
How did that
difficult.
go?
So there have been two editions, but I don't know. I wanted to do it just as a challenge to myself, maybe to give something back.
Yeah.
Also to have my own reference text that I can refer to myself. So it wasn't fun, but it certainly was an achievement.
It was. And again, you know, I remember you going through the motions of that project, and it's tough writing a book. But again, we must say to all the lawyers out there who are listening to this, because we put this through the Law Gazette LinkedIn channel. If you have it in you, if you have expertise, and you want to write a book, honestly, through your career, it will be one of the things that constantly is a touchstone for your credibility. Stephen's done it, I've done it, and even though my books are some years ago, they are still referenced today, and it does set you apart from, you know, other people in your peer group, your contemporaries. So I think the advice would be, if we were giving advice, Stephen, is to do it if you can. And have
Yes, I think,
tight.
yeah, I echo that.
Absolutely. But I like Stephen, it's not a fun job, and you don't make a lot of money. So you know, it doesn't make you a millionaire overnight or anything like that, but it does give you credibility. So going back to the business side, so you established your credentials, you've done a ton of lecturing, you did a whole bunch of stuff for central law training, didn't you? I mean, I remember coming up to Scotland, you were on that circuit, you were training, and sharing the insight on Scottish debt recovery and Scottish enforcement, which is very important really for English creditors who have customers and claims in Scotland and need to know how to enforce resulting judgments. And that's a little bit of a minefield, isn't it? It can be a little bit of a minefield.
Yes, the whole system is very different,
yeah.
In Scotland, and I think that the pendulum, to an extent, has swung too much in favour of the debtor or customer. Although I do recognise that we are in a credit crisis, and we obviously have to be extremely careful when both taking court action and enforcing against an individual.
Yeah.
It's just that an awful lot of the measures that have been introduced also impinge upon the collectability of commercial debts. And I think that is a little bit unfair, but that's where we are with the Scottish Parliament. It is very dynamic and very responsive, the Parliament. And whether one was in favour of devolution or not, I mean, that's what we have. And I mean, look, I'll be honest and I'll say that I wasn't in favour of it, but I do applaud the Parliament in the way that they have reacted to the challenges which society is facing, and they do their best to try to alleviate and address the problems that more disadvantaged have.
Yes, I understand that argument. I mean, having had a proud Scot as a father, yes, he was British, but he was always Scottish first. So, it's hard for people perhaps in south of the border to understand the pride of Scottish people and what they need from their their systems of government and their systems of law, which is very different and built on a different history and different heritage to what we have in England and Wales. So, but so, you know, I understand that point of view. I think, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see Call the Sheriffs as a TV show of Scottish sheriffs going out on their rounds, but that would be a good show if the Scottish sheriffs would put themselves on TV. That would give a lot of transparency to the system, wouldn't it? Do you think that would ever happen?
Good luck with that one, Claire. No.
Do you know
I
the
think
answer?
actually, I would say the fundamental difference between a High Court enforcement officer and a Scottish sheriff officer is that whilst both are very professional at what they do, I think a High Court enforcement officer tries to collect the debt. A Scottish sheriff officer goes through the process of enforcing the decree or decision or judgment, however you want to define it. And if in the course of so doing they recover the debt, then that really is a commendable result. But they're not trying to recover the debt in the way that I see on the programmes that you've just referred. And I think that is a fundamental difference. I think the fee structure, and it was you actually that pointed this out to me, the fee structure in Scotland mitigates against Scottish sheriff officers trying to collect the debt. But I think the chances of that changing, I think hell will freeze over first of all before that would change. So that's the system that we have.
Yeah. Yes. And I remember we had one of our conversations was around the possibility of some of that coming over into England, that policy thinking. And I think you may recall how aghast I was that we would end up with a Scottish system. So thanks ever so much. I'm very proud of my Scottish roots, but keep it all up your side of the country, because this little rock that we call the United Kingdom, you keep it all north of Hadrian's Wall, and we'll just operate how we operate south.
Well, of course, the irony is that you're in Florida and I'm living in London just now.
Yes.
Although I am still working
of course,
remotely.
Yeah. As my husband says, we should have moved to Montana. It's a lot less provocative than Florida. So I mean, going back to the business, which I mean is fascinating to me, and should be for anyone watching this who is in a law firm that doesn't know perhaps the future or wants to future-proof their firm. I think Stephen and I are good examples of how we've taken, you won't mind me saying this, Stephen, but we've taken old-fashioned law firms with old-fashioned thinkings and systems, and we future-proofed them for ourselves, for our teams, and for the future of whatever it is that we're into. And if you're in that situation, perhaps as a younger person, and you're thinking, God, how am I going to do this? Then we're living testament, really, that it can be done. You've just got to find your niche. You've got to find the thing that floats your boat and gets you to where you want to be. Now, in your system of Yuill and Carl, I mean, I remember the trials and tribulations. I had trials and tribulations with IT. You had trials and tribulations with IT, but you stuck at it, and you had a great team, didn't you? I mean, tell us about that.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the whole structure of the firm was supported by paralegals, and we had a great team.
Yeah.
They put up with working in these Dickensian offices, and that continued for many, many years. The team basically dealt with the day-to-day work, processing of the cases, and my door was always open. It was a cellular office, I should add, so that's why you could have a closed door. And we all got on very well. I should perhaps explain that eventually, with the vicissitudes of age, I hate saying that, but there comes a point where you have to work out what your future is going to be. And I was what you'd regard as a sole practitioner. So I was an owner, manager of my own business. So I was approached by a number of other legal firms to essentially sell or merge Yuill and Kyle into them, and I wasn't enamored really with any of them until I was approached by McRoberts, which is a full service commercial law firm, and I merged Yuill and Kyle with McRoberts over 4 years ago now, almost 5 years ago.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I think sensibly McRoberts kept the Yuill and Kyle brand, so it's a separate company, it's a subsidiary of McRoberts. And I was tasked to find a successor to myself. I was managing director for 4 years, I had a 4-year earn-out. And I approached Denise Loney, who I'd known for many, many years, and she came across from her previous firm. And Denise is the managing director, and I'm a director. I was due to retire actually this December, but I've been asked to stay on to December 2023, which I'm very happy to do. But the team, the core team is still there. We've moved into beautiful open plan offices.
Yeah.
And actually, it's only now, after all this period of time, that we're turning our attention to actually developing a new software system.
Right.
Because although what we use is actually very, very good and has been developed well, essentially it's not Microsoft compatible. And that is the way that McRoberts want to go, and I think it's the right way. I have to say that I'm glad that I'm not involved in the project. It'll be Denise that will be implementing that. But it's still the same concept, excuse me, that the team, which is far larger now under Denise's management than it was under my management, still the same concept of Denise managing the business with a team leader, 2 sub-team leaders, working in a collegial fashion.
Yes,
having respect.
Yes, well, I'm so pleased to hear that. And again, for those of you that are listening to this and thinking about, well, you know, what do I do with my firm? I mean, this is what you're building value in your brand. That's why you need to have a brand, and you build value in it till somebody comes along and says, oh, I want to put that in my brand, or I want to acquire that. And we've had those discussions over the years, haven't we? We've
Very
both,
much so.
Yeah, we've both worked, having not inherited by family, but being prepared to stick with these older fashioned law firms. We've modernized them and built them into businesses of value, and you're clearly done it extremely well with yours. And I remember coming to your office in Glasgow, and you were always so polite and friendly with your team, and very much an open door policy type boss, which again I think was testament to you and the way that you wanted to grow your business. So I think it's great that it's turned out in the way that it has for you, because you definitely deserve it, my friend. You definitely deserve it. So I've got you gave me a few pointers about what to ask you about, and you've given me a bit of I'm going to say chuck a spear, but you know, it's explain the Zulu principle. What are we talking about on that? What do you talk about?
Well, that is okay. I mean, I could say to you, what on earth are you talking about?
No, don't do that. It's your question.
I'll tell you, that actually was maybe one of the earliest influences. I'm kind of almost embarrassed to talk about it. But when I was a student, I bought this book by Jim Slater, who you've probably never heard of, called Return to Go. Now, Jim Slater was a self-made man. He was a director of what was BMC, British Motor Corporation, which morphed into British Leyland and then disappeared.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But he went into business with Peter Walker, who was ultimately became a Conservative cabinet minister. Peter Walker introduced the concept of the low-cost endowment, repaying the capital on a mortgage.
Okay.
But Jim Slater and Peter Walker set up a business called Slater Walker Securities. Now, the whole thing, I think, collapsed, and Jim Slater became very much discredited. But he wrote this book, Return to Go, which I read as a student. And essentially, it was how he built up a successful business. It was called Return to Go because he had some moguls, business moguls in the UK that played a game of Monopoly. And actually, 3 of the 4 had never played Monopoly before. I do remember one factor in it, that actually the green properties give you the best investment return in Monopoly. I didn't even know that.
Oh, I didn't
But they,
know
of course,
that.
worked that out straight away.
Okay.
But turning to the Zulu principle, what Jim Slater said was that anything you should do, you should focus on something and become an expert at it and capitalize on that. And that actually, the Zulu principle is what I did with Yuill and Kyle. And I always had that in mind, was to find an area. Now, we must go back, of course. I mean, I said I graduated in 1976. I mean, in those days, law firms were, certainly in Scotland, were far, far smaller than they are now. They did not have the degree of specialisms that they have now. Of course, an awful lot of the specialisms that exist now in legal practices simply didn't exist.
Yeah.
Like environmental law, data protection. You could just go into a law library, and I think maybe 3/4 of the subject matter of books that you'll find in law library, people just didn't say these areas of law didn't exist.
Yeah.
But debt recovery, I mean, look, I'll say it, it's a Cinderella subject amongst solicitors. I know that. I understand that. A lot of lawyers don't really regard it as a serious subject at all, which to an extent probably was one reason why I wanted to write the book, because it is actually an amalgam of a whole lot of other subject areas in the law, and it is important. But the Zulu principle, basically, that's what it was. And it did have an influence on me.
Well, it's good to know the books that have had an influence on people like yourself, because some of the things that you learn in these books, and they're probably on Audible now, but they have an impact throughout your working life. They sort of you pick them up young, and they kind of stay with you, don't they? I've got some of those in my head as well.
Yeah.
So I understand that. Okay, Jim Slater. Get back. And didn't you have Yuill and Kyle on a Monopoly board somewhere? Am I dreaming that?
Yeah, well, that actually, yeah, that's funny you should mention that. As you probably know now, you can buy regional Monopoly boards.
Yeah.
And there was a Glasgow edition, and we were on the first Glasgow edition at Yuill and Kyle Square, or property.
Yeah.
I'll never forget this, because normally it would cost several thousands of pounds to do that. But I got a phone call from the guy that was promoting it, and he asked me if I would like this to be on the board. And I said, well, it sounds a great idea. I said, but really, I don't have a budget for that.
Yeah.
I didn't even ask him. Well, I did find out what it would cost, and he said to me, "Now, you don't understand. I'm giving this to you in recognition of everything that you did for me." I have to tell you, Claire, that to this day I do not know what I did.
Oh,
I I searched through our database. Was he someone a client in the general practice? Did I buy a property for him? I hadn't. Was he a client I'd taken court action for? I hadn't. Was he someone that I'd taken court action against? I hadn't. We were invited to the launch of this STV, that was Scottish Television, where they were filming
yeah.
it. He stood up and he gave a speech, and he wanted to give his special thanks to Stephen Cowan of Yuill and Cowan for everything that he did for him and how grateful he was. And to this day, I still do not know. I still wonder he must have made a mistake.
Well, you would say that, but he clearly had a reason. You'll have to find out what that was. That would.
Well, I don't know. Actually, I just came across these boards, which are actually now falling apart. There's about 4 of the boards left. And I actually just sold my office in West Regent Street.
Right.
A few weeks ago, and I had to clear out the office, and I found 4 of these monopoly boards. So I took them down to the Capella building, that's where Robert's office is, and I gave them to Denise, and I said, well, these are up to you. You can decide what you want to do with them now. Collector's item.
I always thought that was, I actually was quite envious of that, I'll be honest. I thought that was very cool, to be on a monopoly board. Not many people with their business. No. So there you go. That's another reason why you've got to build your brand so that Monopoly come along and offer you a space on their next board. Who knew? So finally, we've got to ask you this, because you are a connoisseur of looking after people and clients, and you've worked damn hard at it over the length of your career, and I'm sure you're continuing to do that. What's the most important aspect of client service, do you think, for anyone listening today? What do you think sets Yuill and Kyle apart?
If you were to ask me to encapsulate it, the most important, I think, is continually keeping in touch with the client and giving them accurate information. I mean, that's the one aspect. Actually, I'll say that my late father is someone that always emphasized that, because he used to get incredibly irate with people that didn't call him back, that promised to call them back. I would always revert to a client if they asked me to do so. I mean, the systems, of course, the computerized systems that we have just now are going to do that.
Yes.
But still, clients want to be spoken to.
Yeah.
And we will do that. And I have to say, Denise is also, I mean, that's in her DNA, I would say. She does that too.
Fantastic. I agree with you. I think the art of explaining and supporting and coaching a client through a situation, whether it be a simple debt claim or whether it be something more complex, you know, is an art, and clients like that in their advisors, don't they? Again, I know that you built a very friendly team of people, and I'm sure there's, you know, some of those are still with you today. I'm sure that Denise is carrying that on, where people are approachable, you know, your team can be approached for the answer and give it and guide clients, which is again, if there's anything you can take from today's interview, I think both Stephen and I are very feet on the ground kind of people, and we've always tried to help people in our practices first, whilst always having an eye on the commercial opportunity. It's possible to do both, you know, and to be the kind of professional solicitor that you want to be, whilst at the same time taking people, the most important people, actually, the ones that pay the wages, the clients along with you. No amount of you know, training can teach you that. It's got to be in you. I think it's got to be innate, don't you? It's got to be something.
Yes, you're right. I'd agree with that. Yeah. It's a service industry. You have to provide the service.
You have to provide the service, and you've got to be and today more than ever, I think you've got to be open to providing it in a very friendly and cool way. And I use that word deliberately because, you know, people who are buying legal services now, they want their lawyers to be in tune with what they're talking about, not the other way around. Which, when I started in the law, you know, if you didn't get something right from my partners, they chuck the paperwork back at you, literally. That's all gone, thank goodness.
Yeah, yeah, I've had that. I've been
I know you
receiving
have.
it.
I know you have. I know you have. So, well, listen, Stephen, I'm so glad that we were able to talk about the growth and the development of Yuill and Kyle, and for you to share your business insight in how you grew your brand, because I know you're a very modest chap, and you don't, you know, although you'll sit and tell me all about it over lunch, this is something quite different for you, I think, in terms of sharing it quite openly.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I've never done this before.
No, I know.
No one's been interested.
So I think it's great that you've shared that, because again, we're at a point in our careers where people may be interested. I'm not saying looking up to us, but they may be interested in how we did it with our law firms. And I think we're both testament, as I said earlier, to being able to build a successful legal practice in a niche that you feel comfortable in, and it may be something completely alien to what we do. It doesn't matter. It's all about serving the client and giving the client service that, you know, is right for your area of practice. So we're going to put all of Stephen's contact, the Yuill and Kyle website, and we'll put that in the show notes. And you've got a LinkedIn, Yuill and Kyle Debt Recovery and Credit Control, so people can contact you through LinkedIn, right, Stephen?
Yes, they can. It's probably better through my own personal LinkedIn.
Of course. So just search Stephen on, it's Stephen with a PH. Just check him out on LinkedIn, and you can connect with him.
Well, I'm hoping this is going to be a regular thing, Claire. I've quite enjoyed it.
Oh, right, okay. Well, we'll have to think about the next topic. What do you want to talk about? Because there's a lot that we can share.
I've been moving to London.
Yeah, moving to London. Okay. Well, as you know, I've followed you and your family through, you know, all of its trials and tribulations. You've got a fantastic wife, who does a lot for Holocaust and Holocaust education, which I think is amazing. So tons going on in your household all the time, and great to see your kids grow up, and all doing fantastically well. I mean, that's what it's all about, you know. That's why we do what we do, right? We build these businesses so that we can all flourish. It's not just about us. And anyway, like Stephen said, it's all about the brand, not him. He's been in the background, as I know he'll say. So thanks, Stephen. For everyone listening today, you know that you can find Shergroup at shergroup.com. We're building our own platform of business solutions to help business owners, which is why today I've talked a lot about lawyers as business owners, how they can help themselves to build their businesses up like we have done. I think we're testament to that. You can check us out on all of our different channels. And like Stephen said, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. So we'll put all that in the show notes. And I hope that this has given you some inspiration today. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you today, Stephen. I knew I would, because we've shared so many war stories over the years of battling to create what we've created. And I followed in your wake. So I thank you very much for all your inspiration.
Thank you. In regards to your sister, in regards to Anne.
Ah, yes, to my sister, my Scottish sister.
Yeah.
Who never failed to remind me that she was born in Bells Hill. So I'm afraid I'm just the English one. But no, to all our Scottish friends, listen, we're not a big enough rock to have too many tribes. We're pretty small in the world, but we're very influential. So we love all of our Scottish friends, and we welcome them in Shergroup. If we can help you, we will. Thanks, Stephen, for such an
Thank you.
interesting conversation, and thanks to everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.